Hi, welcome in. This is Erik McKinney, joined by Katz and Darrell Rideaux, and we're going to go through a couple topics here today. The first, it's Wednesday night. This was the first day of the 2020 class early signing period. We're going to hit on that. We'll get into earlier this week. Heard Graham Harrell signed a multi-year extension with USC. He's going to stick around. We'll talk what that means for USC, and then also look ahead a little bit to the Holiday Bowl. USC's opponent, they're going to play the Iowa Hawkeyes from the Big Ten. But guys, we got to get into this recruiting class. And at this point, if you're watching this, you certainly have heard or read or whatever. You've taken in the fact that USC finished the first day of the early signing period with the bottom-ranked class in the Pac-12, the 12th ranked class in the Pac-12, last. This is a smaller class right now. They only signed 11 players. Everybody else in the conference signed more than 11 players, and that does play a role a bit in kind of the rankings and the points and all of that. But even if you look at it on a per-player basis, USC, I believe, was 6th in the Pac-12. This is not where we're used to USC being. Greg, your thoughts just kind of off the top when you see USC put this class on paper, now officially signed. Again, this is just the early signing period. There could be more names added in the February regular signing period.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, well, two things. One, it is the worst class I've ever seen in my 57 years of watching USC football. Okay? Since recruiting rankings have come out, the only way I can describe this recruiting, in all honesty, is we saw it coming. We knew it was coming. You take a look at the 13 and 11 record the last 2 years, Helton on the hot seat. That being said, it's a fiasco. Okay, it's a fiasco because USC has all the positive things that they can get done to never be in this position. The lowest they should ever be is 3rd. The fact that they're 12th, for lack of a better word, it's horrifying, really. That's not to take anything away from the players that signed. You know, if someone came to me and said, you want to go to SC and play in football, I'd say, where do I sign? But, you know, I don't buy this idea that, they had a small number of classes. SC's had small classes before, but it's those players that they signed, okay? I don't get fired up about, well, we got 8 guys that are 6'6", 275. Everybody's got linemen that are 6'6", 275. It's the type of athlete, okay? It's like saying, hey, I have a center that's 7 feet tall. His name's Shaquille O'Neal. You have an athlete 7 feet tall, and his name is John Smith. You know, it's the athlete, and it's coaching the athlete. So as far as I'm concerned, they could have had 8 guys signed, but if 8 guys were 4 or 5 star players, who's going to complain? They've had small classes before. They had it with Lane Kiffin. He had a small class, and he had dynamite numbers.
Yeah, Lane Kiffin's class, I believe 13 players, but still a top 15 class in the country. And I want to split it a little bit because like you mentioned, there's a difference talking about, I feel like when we're talking about this, there's the difference when you talk about the class as a whole and when you're talking about the individual players. Certainly none of the conversation is meant, to denigrate anyone who's signing. These are all guys who absolutely could have a chance to turn out where you're talking about, a guy that, hey, this 3-star guy now turns into a big-time player for USC and a potential NFL draft pick. It's just so much of it is kind of the optics of what it looks like. You're so used to USC reeling in guys. And yes, I understand Clay Helton said specifically, we wanted big guys, and there weren't a ton of them. This class was low in California, low on really good offensive linemen and defensive linemen. USC got a few offensive linemen, defensive linemen from California, but what you're missing to go out of state and get that big-time guy. Go to Arizona, go up to Washington, go to the Midwest, go to the Southeast, get a guy. When Ohio State has to do that, Ohio is not littered with a bunch of big-time offensive and defensive linemen. When they have to go do that, they go do it. And USC couldn't get it done. Darrell, your thoughts just kind of seeing the class and how it all got put together.
Well, first and foremost, congratulations to the athletes that have elected and chose USC as the school of their choice. It takes a tremendous amount of sacrifice to be a premier student athlete and to put yourself in a position where on a signing day such as this one, this being the early signing day, you get to select the school of your choice. So nothing to take and again, as you alluded to, this is not a slight against these fine athletes that will be attending the University of Southern California, but it does speak to something larger. For the second year in a row, Clay Helton's status as a head coach being in question has hijacked USC's ability to go out and attract premier talent. And for the second year in a row, they have sabotaged their own success, meaning that the class that they brought in this year is not going to really impact 2020 class. Some players may fill in, but it's going to impact the future. When you start thinking about 2 or 3 years down the road, when this class starts to develop and mature and become the leadership of, and you think about the first 11 athletes in, 11 of the 11, 9 being either offensive or defensive linemen, that to me speaks to, as a middle-class family now, I have a wife and we have 3 kids, going to Costco or any type of grocery store hungry. In my basket, grabbing the first junk food that I can find. And for USC, they talk about need. You get 9 out of your minimum amount of scholarships. You elect to go with a slew of linemen. That to me is poor choice. And I heard Clay Helton speak to, well, this class isn't going to reflect high in terms of 4 stars or 5-star athletes, but we based it on need. Then you're not looking that far down the road in terms of what your team is going to become. Because if there is, as there is rumored to be, perhaps a change with his staff, well, we know the fact that Graham Harrell contract was extended. There may not be much change on the offensive side. So let's assume that it's going to be either special teams or defense. Let's take defense, considering that that's the Achilles heel of this team so far. Who's to say that the next defensive coordinator comes in, wants to run the same type of package that a Clancy Pendergast runs? And if that's the case, then you've just sabotaged your own success by electing to go with 9 of 11 linemen when this class may not have called for that. Now, in the past, as you alluded to with Lane Kiffin, when you have a finite amount of scholarships, less than your competitors, that is when you have to be even more selective. Pick and choose wisely. Less is more. Maximum out of the minimum. Get the best of the best. And when you're out in the recruiting class and you're sitting in front of a family, you illustrate or you make that point that, hey, we don't have as many scholarships. So if we're offering this to you, it's because we view you as a premier talent. But because Clay Helton's job security was so uncertain and that there was no endorsement from the athletic director until 11 days after their last game, it left this program as a lame duck. And as a result of that, this is what you see.
I think a lot of your points are really good. It is one of those things. I understand you need to go get offensive linemen. That's because in the last 2 classes, you signed a collection of 4 high school offensive linemen. So now you've done a little bit what you had to do with defensive backs in the last class. You load up with defensive backs in the class because we have to get to our numbers. Now you load up with offensive linemen in this class. We have to get to our numbers. You're kind of setting the stage for, again, in 3 years and 4 years, you have to do it again. And you just kind of keep bouncing back and forth with these kind of overloaded classes at each position. You've got to find a way to get things stabilized to where you're not all of a sudden looking up and going, oh my gosh, we've completely abandoned, this spot for 2 classes. And I think it all just kind of rolls together where you're just missing enough things when it comes to recruiting. Are you recruiting hard enough throughout the year? You hear prospects, especially in this class, talk about what Oregon does when they're recruiting. They recruit clearly differently than USC does, and they clearly make a different impact on recruits than USC does right now. That's something where when Clay Helton talks about kind of taking that top-down look at what he has to fix with this program, that's got to be in there. You see what USC kind of does, and I know for a lot of people watching or following recruiting, it's a small thing. What what schools do on social media, how they announce their players and all of that. You look at what USC does, and I'm sure there's a lot of people putting a lot of time and effort into it. Take a school like Oklahoma, what they did today, where they create a website specifically for that. They create individual logos for each prospect that they sign. There's this big, 5-minute production video. They look like the school in Los Angeles. They look like the Hollywood school that is putting just an unbelievable amount of time and resources, energy, and recruits feel that. That's something that they feel. They know how this program's recruiting them. They know how this program's recruiting them. And it just feels like USC is missing the mark. You had so many marquee guys in Southern California. I mean, big time guys. You had 2 quarterbacks. You had a linebacker in Justin Flo. You had Modern Day was absolutely loaded, and you get nobody from there. I mean, there were so many guys, even a guy like Elias Ricks, who was at Modern Day. Now he's out in Florida. But these are big-time guys, and I get you had to load up with offensive linemen. These are all guys you chase. These are all guys that absolutely could have been in this class. Greg, your thought on missing out on the elite guys, and we all watched, I'm sure, Justin Flo not only pick Oregon, but celebrate Oregon on TV in front of a community that could be a USC community. That's what's happening for me with all these big time guys going specifically to Oregon, but other Clemson, Alabama, other places. You're turning those communities now into a bunch of Oregon fans, a bunch of Alabama fans. It's not that USC community where that guy goes there. And for me, Greg, that's kind of one of the biggest things, that trickle down that you're going to get when guys like this keep spurning USC and keep going to other programs.
Well, and we talked about this earlier, the idea that you just don't lose Justin Flo to Oregon. It's the damage that's done by all the players, juniors in high school that follow Justin Flo. It's seniors that could be signed in February that look what Justin Flo did. Guys like that make it acceptable to leave. It's almost like, I got to leave. The thing is in recruiting, you're either riding high or you're really riding low. And the kids want to ride high. And the thing about it is, with Flo, there was that false sense that maybe he's thinking of SC because we saw the picture with Dr. Bolt and Bryant there from Corona Centennial. And of course, Flo's wearing the USC hoodie, and everybody's getting all fired up. And then you watch the press conference. It was like you could just feel your heart sink a little bit. And the thing is, it's become fashionable to leave. USC is not. USC is a destination for kids in Southern California. Let me just say this point because I think it's very important. This idea that USC sells itself and you don't have to go out and recruit hard because kids want to just come to SC. I take exception to when Helton says that. It's a cop-out to me. And I'll tell you why. Because Pete Carroll had the same situation when he came to USC, and the same environment, the same talent level, everything was there. The difference is Pete Carroll and his staff worked just like the staff in Oregon's doing right now. They didn't let USC be a lazy man's way of recruiting. He went out there and he went everywhere. He locked down California with Ed Ogeron. Then they went outside, when they really got good and got national acclaim. But you have to go out there and recruit. And you can't have part of your staff being a full-time recruiting staff and the other part, well, I recruit only in specific situations. This day, right now, SC has to go out there and beat the bushes like they're in Corvallis, Oregon. And if they don't do it, they're going to be history is going to repeat itself as long as Helton's the head coach.
And Erik.
Yeah.
One of the comments that I heard from a couple of recruits who elected to go elsewhere last season or last year was that it took USC's personnel, coaching staff, so long to get involved in the recruiting process that they almost felt dejected. Now, it's no slight on having a recruiting coordinator, but there comes a time when you get closer to the courtship of making a decision as a recruit, and you start to wonder, okay, how does my skill set fit into your system? And I don't want to hear from a recruiting coordinator. I'd like to hear from a position coordinator or my position coach to give me an understanding of how do you see my skill set fit? During the last stretch of my season, what are some of the things that I could be working on that may change your opinion or that may help me next season? And when you start developing that type of dialogue and that type of kinship, you develop this platonic relationship with your position coach, which makes it more comfortable and acceptable. But when you don't have that connect, it makes it easy for you as a player to want to go elsewhere, where now you're falling in love with the position coach in a different state, despite all of the natural resources that USC and Southern California provides you with just the logistics of being close to home. There is a difference between connecting to the person who is recruiting you and connecting to the process and understanding how your role fits in that process. And that was something that, despite Paul Hackett being the coach that recruited me, I gravitated to the likes of a Dennis Thurman. And because of that, it made it very difficult for me to say no to USC.
I'm curious your take too, and again, we can kind of parse numbers and all of that, what it looks like. I think just the overall feeling of kind of when you look at them being in 12th, it tells you everything you need to know. Again, there are guys still out there. Gary Bryant, a wide receiver from Corona Centennial, he's still in play. There's a few guys that USC has as targets that will make their announcements in those January All-Star games, and certainly could add a handful of players and see that ranking go up. But as a player on the team, when the recruiting class comes in, how kind of keyed into that are you? What does that do to morale? Again, if you see, because USC players are used to, hey, there's another group of big time guys coming in. What could something like this do, to the roster of guys that's already there? Because again, the last couple of classes have been solid. There's been some stars in the last few classes and on the roster right now.
Right. Well, again, the biggest thing about when we talked about the offseason hijacking the recruiting process is it fractures trust. And when you're a current player and you're doing all that you can to prepare for a season, prepare for a bowl game, but also kind of foreshadowing the season to come, you want to know that the coaching staff is doing all that they can to surround you with complementary great players, that you're going to be surrounded by players that are going to transcend this program and get you to the next level. And that next level may be competing for one of the 4 spots in the championship tournament, or it could be, being featured in the top 10 so that it projects you better when it comes to All-American status. There's no reason why Michael Pittman Jr. should have had to, basically kind of fall relegated to the second tier or second level of All-American status with the type of year that he's had. If USC is on a higher platform, we're not talking about him being honorable mention in certain categories. We're talking about him being featured as perhaps the Biletnikoff Award finalist and winner. So for me, trust starts to erode when I look at my class and I say 12th. To be at USC and to finish 12th, you don't have to recruit for that. You can just virtually just say, hey, we have some open scholarships. And when people say USC recruits itself, by default, you should fall at least to 3rd and 4th, as Coach alluded to. So for me, as a player coming back or contemplating coming back, and I see a class like this, I'm saying, well, where's my supporting cast? How is this class coming in? Guys that I probably haven't even heard of that are going to have to overachieve and may not be available to help us right away because they're not projected as an impact starter or player. How are they going to help me be at the best against a team like Alabama? It's utterly embarrassing. And as a player, it causes you to think about how the detriment of 11 days passing before Clay Helton was announced as the coach of the present and the short-term future.
And just as the last point, while we hit on the recruiting class, and maybe, trying to slide in a little bit of a silver lining, looking ahead at the 2021 class, it's definitely off to a big start. I mean, you've got a quarterback in Jake Garcia. You've got a great linebacker, a defensive lineman. You've got guys there. And it feels odd that you couldn't put together really any elite guys in the 2020 class. Again, not totally finished yet, but it does seem like there is maybe a little bit of momentum in that 21 class if you want to spin it forward. But certainly today, Wednesday, not about that 2021 class, just about 2020. But spinning forward a little bit, Greg, I want to go to you. Let's talk Graham Harrell. He's at USC. He's staying at USC. He took head coaching interviews. Texas came after him for their offensive coordinator position. It felt like maybe there would be some fits, but he ends up back at USC, signs an extension, reportedly 3 years, over $1 million a year. This is USC, maybe for the first time that I can certainly remember, making a big investment in a coordinator, getting up there to where you're paying a coordinator what some of these elite programs are paying. Greg, I know on paper you don't love the air raid, but did you see enough from Graham Harrell? Is this a positive kind of for USC, for the offense, for this program going forward?
Well, I think it is a positive because there's continuity now. Okay, the guy who knows the offense is calling the offense. The guy that's in charge of quarterbacks and calling the offense, there's a comfort zone there. You have to separate Graham Harrell, the coach, the continuity from the offense. My problem with the offense is simply I don't recall any air raid offense winning a national championship unless you go back to 1984 with Lavelle Edwards at BYU and Robbie Bosco. They won it in the mythical national championship, and they threw the ball all over the place. But in today's era, whether it was the BCS or whether it's the college football playoffs, when you get to the elite teams, and of course, it's no secret. I mean, Mike Bohn says it, Helton says it. We're going for the national championship. Well, you get up amongst that high echelon group, they can all run the ball, and they can do it physically with authority, and they're not one-dimensional. But right now, I think for where SC has to be, can you imagine if Harrell had left? If you weigh the two, you go, how horrifying would that be? Because if Harrell leaves, we all know that Helton doesn't know or has a belief in an offense. Otherwise, he wouldn't have changed his offense. So if Harrell goes, who do you bring in? What offense are they bringing? It just opens up a can of worms. And I think what's best for USC, I actually think it's a win-win-win situation for both SC and Harrell. Harrell said his family likes it here. His wife likes it here. Okay, he's comfortable with the players. He's comfortable with the place. He says he's a Texan. He says, I'll retire one day in Texas. Okay. But he realizes now he's a millionaire. If he stays 3 years, he's going to be a triple millionaire. And also a big key is if for some reason Clay Helton doesn't make it through next year or what have you, I think he has a better chance next year of making it through because I think they're actually going to be pretty good and have the capability, I think, actually of winning 10 games and being a front runner, if not the lead dog in the conference race. That remains to be seen, but on paper, I think it's there. But by staying, Helton puts himself in an excellent position to either be the USC head coach in the future, or at the very worst, he'll be a hot commodity if SC gets to the college football playoffs and maybe his beloved state of Texas, something opens up.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't feel like that offense is going to fall off with what's coming back. I mean, replacing maybe a couple of offensive linemen, certainly one, and then Michael Pittman. But, boy, those wide receivers coming back, you have to like what's there. Darrell, what do you feel? I mean, it was clear the offensive players loved Graham Harrell this year, loved the system, loved playing for him, loved kind of his personality, the way he went about it. What kind of boost does this give them? What does this do for the players specifically? I mean, we're talking offense here. The offensive guys going into Iowa and then going into the off season too, and then into next season.
Well, I do think that in this case, familiarity breeds content, and what that means is guys that may have contemplated going to the league or throwing their name in the hat for the NFL draft. Now we'll have to think about coming back and what will it look like another year in an offense where you don't have to think, you can just simply react and put up prolific numbers because you know who's going to anchor the quarterback position in Keaton Slovis. You can almost kind of grow up with them. But for USC, we thought that this would be the case. If Clay Helton were to come back, due to financial circumstances of the buyout being a little bit too much and then bringing in a new coach, maybe sprinkling some of those resources to position coaches. But I didn't see them having to double down on an offensive coordinator that they just brought in last year, paid him a ton of money to bring him in and entice him, maybe some guaranteed incentives. And now all of a sudden you have to up the antes and pay him when there's other needs on your coaching staff. So let's just hope that this is the start of an open checkbook and that additional resources can be dispersed amongst and that they didn't overbid themselves. Because truth be told, Graham Harrell is what this offense needs. And as Coach alluded to, if something were to happen to Clay Helton, you can immediately now see the next highest paid coach on the team is Graham Harrell, who should, going into this season, earn the title of associate head coach or assistant head coach or something like that, in the likelihood that Clay Helton is unable to perform his duties. Let's just say he gets impeached, okay? But for my money, I would like to see additional resources being dispersed onto special teams and the defensive side of the ball. Now make that decision. But as it pertains to the offense, the continuity coming back on that side gives this team a fighter's chance. And if you play complementary football with a solid defense, you don't have to be a great prolific defense, but just find yourself in the top 30, and that'll be just enough because this offense is very capable of putting up enough points to ride yourself into a top 6, top 5 talk going into next year in terms of where this offense can be ranked with Keaton Slovis as the quarterback.
Yeah, Clay Helton and the assistants didn't want to get into what's going to happen after the bowl game or what's going to go on with the coaches, but clearly that's going to be a talking point and discussion, what happens at some of those other spots on the coaching staff after that game. And let's go into that game, Greg. It's Iowa. Certainly not the sexiest team that you could find yourself up against. I mean, there's some Big Ten teams, a Michigan or something like that, but what are your kind of initial thoughts of USC going up against Iowa? It does feel like they're going to bring that word again, physicality, that kind of what you expect from a Big Ten team. They're going to bring it, and it's up to USC to kind of go toe-to-toe against that.
Well, let's take a look at the track record with SC playing physicality teams from the Big Ten in recent times. They lost to Wisconsin, and they really got handled by Ohio State. Now, when you look at the record of Iowa's a very disciplined team. USC is a very inconsistent disciplined team, and that's being nice about it. So right there, you got two different types of ball being played. And after 12 games, they're going to be what they're going to be. The Leopard isn't going to change its spots. Iowa, I talked with a Division I head coach today, and we were talking about Iowa and USC, and we both said they're not going to play man-to-man against SC's receivers. They're going to zone it, and they've got a front seven that can really play ball. I mean, the defensive end is an All-American. Okay, that's going to be interesting because supposedly he's going to be matched up with Austin Jackson. Okay, and you've got an offense, while it's not prolific, they have a veteran quarterback. And if SC gets into a Wisconsin type of slugfest in the Holiday Bowl, they're gonna have a game of it. And SC just has not played well against physical teams, and especially ones that are disciplined.
Yeah, you mentioned the Big Ten teams that they've played. You didn't mention Notre Dame. I mean, I know Notre Dame's not a Big Ten team, but that same kind of thing. And Notre Dame's a team that's been brought up by a couple of the USC coaches this week on maybe who Iowa resembles. And USC, they got Notre Dame, that rainy game at home. But, boy, anytime USC has had to go out to South Bend and try to run against that team or try to match up physically, Notre Dame's gotten the best of USC in recent years. Darrell, defensively, Iowa's going to come in. They're going to run the ball. They're going to take care of it. How does USC stack up? USC's defense going against Iowa's offense.
Yeah. Eric, before I talk about that, if I may, this kid, AJ, I think it's Espinoza, reminds me, and he's number 94 for Iowa. He can literally change a game. He reminds me a lot of J.J. Watt when I watch him on film. He causes havoc, and they move him around on that defensive line. So it's USC is going to have their hands full because they've had some communication issues. And if you're Keaton Slovis, it's going to be crucial that you protect the ball because as an All-American, he looks to cause sack fumbles. So he's going to go after the ball. But flipping that over, although you can think in theory they're measured as a Big Ten team, and naturally you think corn-fed up front and that they're going to run the ball. But this is the team that hasn't really found its rhythm offensively. They just haven't committed to the running game where all season long they featured a running back that has rushed over 100 yards. In fact, I believe it was Tyler Goodson had one game over 100 yards. So what you're going to find is they're looking behind Nate Stanley, their quarterback, who's a senior veteran. His numbers are down this year. And so when you look at them on film, I think that Kirk Ferentz, having played against him in the first Orange Bowl under Pete Carroll in 2003, understanding how he likes to play, he plays to the strength and identity of his team. And he knows that his team, with a fifth-ranked defense in terms of scoring defense, and then 11th against the pass, this is the team that's built around special teams and defense. So they don't ask the offense to win games. They simply ask the offense not to lose games. But what can we expect? We can expect a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets. They are going to run some, power run sets from that. But they also want to try to bunch you in and then spread you out. They're going to test to see how smart USC is. And just as I say that they don't feature a lot of running, when they watch how many yards USC gives up, I would not be surprised if they change up their game plan and see just how disciplined USC can be. But this game does not fit USC's personnel because USC likes to run a nickel. In this game, it calls for a traditional 4-3. And so you better put your hard hats on and figure out what additional linebacker is going to be on the field. Because if you think you're going to go into this game with the smaller corner, you're sadly mistaken because this is a team that can control the line of scrimmage, and on defense, they can cause many 3-and-outs. So this is a game where if USC isn't careful, they can find themselves in a slugfest, in a tight game, which is the kind of game that Iowa wants, a close game because they trust their special teams in their defense.
That feels exactly right about Iowa. You look at their numbers offensively, you look at kind of the personnel, and nobody really scares you offensively, and yet they're in every game. Everything is close. I think defensively they do just enough to kind of allow their offense to maybe score enough points to win a game, and that's where USC is going to have to really tighten things up, and we'll get a sense of if they can carry some of that momentum from the end of the year over into this holiday. Well, I think it's going to be a fun one. Again, like we all sort of mentioned, to see if USC can show up and play this kind of game, because this maybe is like a tiny, tiny preview of what you're going to get against Alabama, which is, times 10 to start next season. So you'd better be able to finish this, I think, this year on a high note, because if something goes wrong against Iowa, that is a long time until that Alabama game, with a lot of potential negativity to build up. So we'll see how USC does December 27th against the Iowa Hawkeyes. So thank you for watching our look at signing day at Graham Harrell at the Holiday Bowl. For Darrell Rideaux, for Greg Katz, this is Erik McKinney. Thanks for watching We Are SC.